Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie, and I'm here today with Rachael Salter and Aimee Brown, who are both data protection consultants with us at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider, Talk DP. So today we're going to be talking about data subject access requests, or DSARs, and whether they should be looked at as business burden or a data protection opportunity. So my first sort of question to kick off our conversation, guys, is do DSARs really improve trust with customers, or are they just a compliance checkbox exercise for most organisations?
So that's a great question, Annie, actually. And you know, I personally think that they do add an increased trust with customers. I think it helps with transparency and the confidence that a customer may have in an organisation when they realise that the organisation is taking their privacy obligations seriously. I think it all depends, though, because, you know, I mean, Aimee, you know, we know that we've seen poorly handled DSARs in the past, and the effect that can have in terms of actually having the complete opposite effect on trust with customers. If a request isn't handled independently, or it's handled by a department that perhaps is involved in the DSAR, that can really help to reduce the lack of confidence in an organisation. So yeah, I think it's about trust in the process. It's about having confidence in the client to tell the truth and be honest and open and transparent, which is in line with the legislation and what it asks us to do. But yeah, I mean, Aimee, you've had some experience of some poorly handled ones, haven't you, in the past?
Yes, absolutely. And I think DSARs come from a place where there's already a change in the trust that the customer or the employee has with the business, with the organisation, because of a dispute or something that's gone on there. So it's already coming from distrust. And if it's handled well, then that can switch that around, that can change that for that customer or employee. But a lot of the time, I feel that businesses are just trying to tick that box. They're just trying to do what they know that they've got to do without really looking at the wider impact of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we've ever, in our experience of all the years Aimee and I have been dealing with DSARs, I don't think anyone's ever put in a DSAR for a good reason. It's always a negative experience. It's always, you know, you're always on the back foot because the person putting in the DSAR is already unhappy with your organisation for one reason or another. So I guess businesses have an opportunity to turn that around with their client, customer, employee, ex-employee, whoever it is who's driving the DSAR, you know, and change it from being a really negative experience into a positive experience as best they can to try and recoup some confidence from their customer or employee.
Yeah, and absolutely. If they use that transparency and, again, getting some independence into doing that, it can help increase the trust. So outsourcing that to a professional organisation who do, like ourselves, who do that all of the time, that can then show that the data subject that you actually know that this isn't impactful to them and you're actually taking it seriously for them.
Yeah, less of a tick box exercise, I guess, Aimee. Yeah, because we certainly have experience of clients who just process DSARs as a matter of course, don't put anything into them. It's just the bare minimum. They feel it's a burden on the business. They're unhappy with the data subject for submitting it. And you know, actually that just leads to really poor handling. And the customer will know that. The requester will know that that's how you feel. And it does have an impact on that. And it can increase that customer's anxiety, their lack of trust in the business, you know. Outsourcing this as a service, for example, to someone like URM, we handle a lot of these for clients. It can help the end user, the requester, to have more confidence because they feel that an independent person is then leading on that. And often a DSAR is driven by something like a restructure or letting a person go, a redundancy process or something like that. So they already don't trust the organisation, and then to ask for their information and fear that they're not going to get the truth or the full picture. By outsourcing that as a service, for example, can give that individual the confidence that an independent person who has no emotional connection to them or the business will handle this professionally and in the right manner. So that can really help to look at some sort of outsourcing service and get that interdependent support from another organisation.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. So how can organisations reframe DSAR handling as a chance to improve their overall data governance instead of treating it purely as a legal burden?
That's a good question. Another good question. Yeah. So there's a lot to learn from doing DSARs. There's a lot of organisational learning that can come out of this. Amy's background, for example, I'll let her explain, but in her background, there was an awful lot of trend analysis and organisational learning from what they found from their internal DSARs. I don't know if you want to explain a little bit about that, Aimee, in terms of what the benefits were to the business by doing this.
Yeah, so my background comes from a large corporation who dealt with hundreds of DSARs a month. And trend analysis was one of our main objectives out of those. Why are these DSARs coming in? Is something happened within the organisation that has triggered a certain amount of them? Is there something that is going on within the business where staff need further training, or there is a process problem that's causing the distrust or unhappiness with the service that they're receiving? So it was a very, very important part of our team to feed that back into the business so that improvements could be made, because then that can help bring down those numbers and also improve customer satisfaction.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's so much to learn from it, isn't there? I mean, I think certainly my experience, when you look at the trends of DSARs, what's driving that? Is it a policy problem? Is it a training need? Is it a particular department that's got something that's going on? There's always a reason behind why these things are happening. And actually, there's a benefit to the organisation to do something proactive with that. And to identify, is it around data quality? Is it around data cleansing? Is it poor retention? We're still holding data that's 10 years old, which makes DSARs an absolute nightmare. An organisation can be more proactive and actually ease that burden on themselves if they can truly appreciate what the data subject wants. They can look at the processes. They can make things better for themselves. There is an opportunity to learn, or an OFI, an opportunity for improvement every time, if they take the analysis seriously and look at those trends.
And it doesn't have to be hundreds of DSARs. It can be one DSAR that company's brought in, but why was that employee unhappy? Why is that customer unhappy? Is there something we can improve from it? It doesn't have to be large numbers for you to find improvement within your organisation.
Yeah, you could spot problems really quickly, can't you?
Right, next one for you guys. What are the hidden costs of DSARs? So legal review, redaction time, IT resources, that sort of thing. How should businesses measure whether those costs bring any tangible benefits? So
Aimee and I probably get asked this 2 or 3 times a week. How long is this going to take? What's the demand? What's the resource needed to complete a DSAR? And, we always go back with, well, how long is a piece of string? Because you just can't quantify that. And this is really tricky. And I think this is why this is quite a burden on a lot of our clients and a lot of organizations, because they don't truly know the financial impact until it's over. And by then you've had to do it anyway. So it's cost you whatever it's cost you at that point, and you can't really budget for them. It's really tricky. And, it does depend on the request as well. It depends on what the request is asking for. If it's driven by anger and upset, it may well have, a ton of content in there that's going to deliberately drive the cost of the DSAR up. If somebody comes and says, I want something very specific, and they're very clear about what they want a conversation, they want a record of something, they want evidence of something that happened, and they can specify what that is, that's quite quick and clean, and you can deal with that. Often though, certainly Aimee will say as well, how often do we get, I want everything.
Yeah.
I want everything.
More
and they don't want
not.
Everything. Nobody really wants everything. But they will ask for everything because they're angry, they're hurt, they want to punish the organisation. So that's going to be costly, because actually now the amount of work that has to go into locating everything, whatever everything is, and often organisations miss something, which means they have to revisit it later. And again, that's increasing the cost and the burden on the team. It's not even just about cost. It's about the amount of resource that has to get thrown into this, the amount of teams and stakeholders that have to get involved in pulling the information together. That's hard to quantify. How many departments, if 7 or 8 departments have to get involved and it takes them a week to pull the information together, what does that truly cost a business in financial terms? If a handler can identify something early on, so Aimee and I are very good at, for our clients where we're handling DSARs on their behalf, we're very good at forging a relationship with the data subject and saying to them, help us to help you. What is it you really want? What are you looking for? Because if it's something to do with a redundancy, if it's something to do with a restructure, if you were bullied by a particular member of the team, if there was an incident that happened in 2013, whatever it is, tell us what it is, because we can then focus our attention on finding you that quickly and efficiently. A, it's a benefit to the organisation because they don't go over the deadline, so less interaction from the ICO. And B, it makes the data subject have confidence in us, handling it for them, that we're doing everything we can to facilitate that request. We have no emotional involvement, we're independent, and we're there to give them what they legally are entitled to have. So it is about getting into the bones of the individual and, finding out what they want and pulling that sort of raw data together with them if you can. But it's really important to remember that the legislation does allow for an individual to say they want everything. So you have to be prepared for that. And a lot of organisations struggle with quantifying the cost and the burden on the organisation. And I'd love to be able to say, a DSAR will cost you £5,000 to do. But we don't know that because we don't know how much information is stored on systems. We don't know how many hours it's going to take, and actually, how do you quantify your on-staff costing for pulling that raw data together or outsourcing it? It's really tricky. It's really tricky. It's about getting stakeholders involved. It's about having good processes. That's also really important. If an organisation has a good governance structure and they have a process on how to handle DSARs, they might be quicker and more efficient. Certainly in my experience working with clients who have very little governance in place, it can take them so long to get everything together, and you've only got that one calendar month. So actually the time's ticking very quickly. So it's all around processes, it's all around efficiencies, it's all around governance and making sure you've got your processes in place. So, what are the hidden costs? It's unquantifiable, really. It's really tricky to tell you the actual number. But the better you are at your governance and your processes, the quicker and more efficient that you will be processing them, hence reducing the amount of financial demand on the business.
There's also an aspect of the amount of data you're holding and how organised it is. The more organised your data is, and you know where things are held, and you know that they're in a SharePoint or a OneDrive and everybody's got stuff in the same places, the easier it is to do that data discovery. But if you've got people who are storing stuff on their hard drives and they're storing stuff offline, then it makes your data discovery more difficult. If you've got a poor retention policy, it makes your data discovery more difficult. And then you could end up going through 150,000 emails to try and find the information the data subject wants.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's all they want is the smoking gun, that they want that one. They know what they want, and they know that one piece of information is in there somewhere, or they think it is. But you have to go through gigabytes worth of data to try and get all this stuff together for them to then send on for them to find that little one-liner that they think is going to help them.
And from URM's perspective, like Amy hits the nail on the head, they often know what they want. A good disclosure officer will find that. So we'll look for the data, find it, and make that disclosure. One of the other things for organisations to bear in mind, and this is really important, is that often a disclosure or a DSAR doesn't come in on its own. It can come in alongside a complaint for another authority. So in our experience, Amy and I work with a lot of housing associations. And because the DSAR is driven by a problem, an issue, or a breakdown in communication or relationship between them and the tenant and the housing association, there's often an ombudsman complaint that goes in at the same time. Or, if it's an employee tribunal, you've got ACAS getting involved. So, the financial burden is enormous, financial and in terms of time restrictions for your team can be quite enormous. So it is hard to quantify, really hard. I mean, we at URM are quite good at finger in the air, guess at roughly what we think it's going to take, but it is how long is a piece of string.
So this next one I know is a bit of a tricky one, but when is it appropriate to push back on a DSAR as manifestly unfounded or excessive, and how can organisations defend that decision to regulators?
Ooh, that's a toughie,
isn't it? We don't get a lot of guidance on this, do we, Amy? The commission is this is a real grey area.
Very vague.
Wouldn't we love them to say, this is an example of an excessive or manifestly unfounded request? But like most pieces of legislation, it's there for interpretation. And it is really hard to establish this. Establishing a request is malicious. Amy and I have dealt with a lot of malicious requests. So again, just going back to housing associations, for example, the number of DSARs where we've seen them where a tenant is unhappy about a leak in their kitchen. It's been going on for 5 years. It's flooding their kitchen, and the housing association haven't done the repair work that needs to happen. So they put in a subject access request to cripple the business, basically, to get all the information that they can. And often what they will say is, I will withdraw that DSAR from the company if you fix my plumbing, if you do this for me. So it's an emotional blackmail, really, to say, I will stop putting this business under strain if you do what I need you to do for me. And I'm sure Amy's seen it many times, just like me. It happens quite a lot of those. Or if you pay me off, I will withdraw my disclosure. I will withdraw my DSAR. Happens quite a lot.
Especially with employee ones, that type of thing. I've seen that where the employee said, but actually we will remove the tribunal and we'll remove the DSAR if you give me £250,000.
Yeah. And it's really common. It's really common that this happens, and ultimately this is abuse. This is an abuse of the DSAR process. It's not in the nature of the legislation. That's not what the DSAR process is there to do. So the ICO do take a very dim view on that. But unless somebody puts in writing, I will withdraw my DSAR if you do this for me, then actually how are we evidencing that? Amy and I will be dealing with disclosures like this all the time, where we know our gut instinct is this is being emotionally driven. They want to pay out, or they want this, and this could all go away so easily. But we can't evidence that enough to push back and say, we believe this is manifestly unfounded or a malicious request, because they'll say, how do you know that? How do you prove that? How do we evidence that? And we can't unless they specifically put something in writing. So it is incredibly difficult to evidence. Obviously, a lot of disclosures are put in, DSARs are put in to drown a business in paperwork, to make, if I worked in an organization that I knew didn't have very good retention, and they have a lot of they're very paper heavy, and I wanted all my information, I know that I could literally drown them in weeks and weeks of paperwork, which will cost them thousands of pounds to process. So is that malicious? Am I doing that deliberately? Do I really want my information? Because the idea is around openness and transparency. That's what the legislation was created for. Am I really wanting openness and transparency, or am I just wanting to hurt the organisation that's done something bad to me, or I feel I've lost my confidence in? So it is tricky to do. And excessive, Amy, how hard is it to define excessive?
Oh, so hard, because for one organisation, 500 pages might be excessive. For another organisation, 5,000 might be excessive. And then for another organisation, it may be 50,000 records. How do you then determine which is too large? Even for smaller businesses, they may still need to look at that 50,000 and still go ahead with it, because there's no defining boundaries or range for you to.
We don't have anything, do we, in the legislation that tells us excessive is 500 records. And like Amy said, some of our organisations, some of our clients, 500 records is mammoth for them, huge. Mm-hmm. Amy and I can be dealing with disclosures that have got 20, 30,000 emails in. And actually even we can't argue that's excessive, because your definition of excessive depends on the organisation and what's driving it. I think the other thing as well to note, which is really important, is individuals putting in repeated requests or continuing. They put in a request 1 week, then they put in a following request with another set of detail or criteria, then another, to try and cripple a business, to literally flood them in requests. The ICO take a dim view on that. And they see that as excessive. And it is, we encourage our clients to push back when this happens. Don't be afraid to push back at the request and to defend the business's position, and when the regulator gets involved, the commissioner, don't be afraid to say, we feel this is excessive. One DSAR at a time, please. Let's look at how we can manage this, because you're doomed to fail from a deadline perspective when that happens. You're going to be swamped in paperwork. Your staff are going to be really extremely stressed. So actually, how do you ever meet the requirements of the deadline? You're not going to. You just set up to fail from the minute that starts. But the ICO will discuss that we have these interactions with our clients and the commissioner. They will discuss these matters. It's quite reasonable to challenge. Don't be afraid. I always say to all our privacy partners, anyone who's data protection leads, data protection officers in businesses, push back. Don't be afraid to say to the ICO, we consider this, the size of this, the nature of it, the number of repetitive requests, we deem this to be excessive, and argue that. Don't be afraid to do that. The ICO is quite reasonable. So, they will have those conversations with you. They won't accept that your house is not in order, your paperwork is poor, you don't have enough people, that's not an excuse. So, you do have to have a valid argument to push back, but we encourage that quite a bit, don't we, Amy? We encourage our clients to push back and challenge.
Yeah, and they won't allow you to do it as a blanket approach either. So with the housing associations, there's lots of disrepair based DSARs that come through. And if you blanket approach those, then the ICO doesn't look favourably upon that. It has to be a case by case.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to give a valid rationale as to why you deem that to be.
Yeah, they're quite complex.
Mm-hmm.
So should organisations proactively use DSAR data, so request metrics and common queries, things like that, to inform their privacy strategy and customer engagement? And if so, how?
That's a great question. No, that's 100%. A good question. Yeah, definitely. So in my background, coming from a statutory organisation that has a publication scheme can save so much time. And this is where an organisation will publish certain key documents. What you find, we touched on just a few minutes ago around repetitive type requests, organisational learning, looking at monitoring and analytics around what drives these things. If you can reduce the burden on the business by publishing some of that information, when a DSAR comes in, you can signpost them to the right place. That is really important. A lot of local authorities, education, NHS, policing bodies will have a publication scheme making that data available on a website or in print so that you can literally reduce the burden on the DSAR. And that is a dramatic reduction in the burden. A disclosure officer will signpost a requester to any available data on the website. They can say, this question, thanks for sending that in. We know you want this information. We can signpost you to something like a policy that will help to answer some questions. This is where it gets a little bit close to freedom of information, because DP and FOI kind of go hand in hand. And often, certainly in Amy and I's experience, some of the requests can get very close to each other. So a person can put in a request for some information about themselves, but within that request, they could also ask for some corporate information or something around policy, which then falls into FOI instead of DP. But those requests can often be twofold, can't they, Amy? They can come in together wanting, and how you split them and how you manage them, because you have two pieces of legislation that dictate the response time, what they can have, what they can't have. So publishing information, commonly asked questions, things like that, it will always help to reduce some of the burden. Requesting metrics and doing analytics is really important. Long term, it take time, won't it though, Amy, for it to reduce the burden?
Yeah, and I'd also say for some organisations, self-service portals would be really helpful. So especially with employees, give them the ability to access their data, through their own personal self-service portal can also cut down a lot of those requests, enable data subjects to actually access that information without having to go via the DSAR. Doesn't have to just be employees. Customer information via self-service can also be a massive reduction in DSARs.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of our clients, Amy, they are now moving to a sort of employee portals, aren't they? And it's really reducing the burden on them, because a lot of big corporate organisations get DSARs from internal or ex-employees. They're unhappy with something that's happened. A process, perhaps their performance review didn't go as well. Maybe they're part of a redundancy process, whatever it might be. So the fact that they can get into their HR portal and pull off their training records, any grievance reports, anything around performance, sickness, whatever, they can access that. It's their data. Why can't they access that? So the portal approach is really helping a lot of our bigger clients to manage that demand. So there's a lot they can do to make it better for themselves.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, guys. That was a really insightful discussion. If any of our listeners would like to ask Amy and Rachel a data protection question, you can do so by either submitting a question using the form that's linked in the description, or by putting it in the comments, and they will get back to you in a future episode. So please send us your questions, and see you next time. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.